and welcome back. You're listening to Parents Canada Talk Radio on News Talk Saga 960. You're here with Lisa Durante, and my co-host is...
Jason Thompson.
Jason, welcome back. So, another week has gone.
And you're the one who was in pseudo-crisis last week about childcare, so what's going on?
Yeah. So still no childcare, and I've basically done a lot of parenting and not a whole lot of working, and so when you're a working parent, that's not the
What's that look like? What
balance.
Does that mean, I've done a lot of parenting?
Well, school runs from 9 to 3:30.
Yeah.
My workday usually goes from... Well, in the summer, it was lovely. It would go from 9 to 5. And so that is several hours out of my day spent parenting rather than working. So a lot of the work has to happen after they go to bed.
I don't have a nanny, right? So, and I do most of the after school stuff. So, but how do you manage that? Because for me, it's like I get them off the bus, I bring them home, we chat for a bit, and then they go and do a thing, and I continue to work. So how is that different for you?
Well, they're younger.
That's true.
So it's, okay, I want a snack. Okay, let's figure out a snack. And then they want to talk to me about their day, so we do that. And then I need to do some homework. So then the younger one especially, she's in the 3rd grade, and most of last year, it was a lot of sitting down and getting her to sit there and really monitoring. And this year she still hasn't broken that habit. So it's, okay, come sit with me. I have to do some homework. So then it's just sitting there. And then if I'm on my phone, then she's like complaining, you're not paying attention to my homework. And then it's start dinner and then go from there.
All right.
So it takes up, it's literally just, there's no time to do work. And a lot of my work is writing work. So for me, my process is I need to just focus. And so I cannot. There are times where I'll take a call and I'll just plop them in front of the television and, throw a snack their way. And that will work for about a half hour. And then I'll usually get, Mommy, I have something very important to tell you. And then it's back to parenting. So
I think I had that moment with the 8-year-old this week. I was like, okay, I'm on deadline. I'm just going to finish this article. And she was, she's now making her own. I'm so proud of her. She makes ramen on her own now, which is great.
Nice.
And she has a little thing of veggies she can toss into the ramen, that sort of stuff. But then she wanted to come and tell me about her idea for a great story. So
yeah. There's a lot. It's very important, and
it is very important.
Very important. Although I've explained, especially to my older one, that important when Mommy's on a call means you're bleeding or someone is bleeding in the house. And there are times where they will come up and, they barge in. It's never a quiet little, tiptoe into the room. It's like a bang open the door. And so it startles me and everyone hears it on the other side. And then it's, I will put myself on mute. I'm like, you don't look like you're bleeding. Is anybody else bleeding in the house? And then they'll be like, no, but I've got something very important to tell you.
What is it?
Yeah. And then, then we go from there.
I'm hopeful for you to encounter peace.
Yeah, soon. There might be some light at the end of the tunnel. So we've been getting some responses. So hopefully we'll have someone who is responsible and great and can take my children until I want them back.
So if you've been sending your resume into at Parents Canada on our social media, we're good, we're full, we're moving forward, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. How about you? How has your week been?
It's interesting for me. It's a new year. Like we talked about that kind of pseudo empty nest sort of thing. One off at university, one going kind of flipping the role of where she goes more of the time, which is at her mom's and things like that. So it's here's what I've learned. It's more driving. More early mornings. The driving is important for me. I wrote an article for Parents Canada a couple of years ago about how my most important philosophical part of parenting comes during the drive. And the kids validated this over the summer because we do a road trip every year. And I remember I was driving to Cincinnati with my oldest one, and he told me his favorite part of the road trips, and it blew me away. And he said, it's the drive. We're heavy podcast listeners, and we have these great conversations. And it's really
good.
Particularly the school pickup, when I pick up from school, is that opportunity to say, not just how did your day go, I'm literally scanning for gaps and opportunities based on kind of the overall approach that I'm taking to parenting, which is heavy on the emotional intelligence and behavior development. So, for example, if I've got one kid who is it constantly would say to me, I can't wait for, I can't wait for, I can't wait for. And so, trying to put them in the moment to say, hey, listen, it's great to have totems to look forward to, but tell me about what's great right now, sort of thing. I had one of the kids say, tell me that their teacher didn't like them. And so we unpack that in the drive. I call that mortar time as the most important time because it's stuff we can forget about. Listen, it's not all like formal dad stuff. We're listening to music. Rico Kasich from the Cars passed away a couple of days ago, so I introduced my kids to the Cars, and my oldest one who sings, she really, really likes Shake It Up. And
cool.
So she's trying. So that's all great. So I think that's the opportunity in our time to do that. But, a couple of things I'm noticing. Number one, the increase in driving. I'm almost 50 and I can feel it in my hips.
Ooh.
Yeah, no, I started a stretching regimen about a year ago, and now I'm shifting the stretching regimen now because it's like, driving to the studio, which is a 35-minute drive for me, is actually starting to create some pain.
Yeah, you need to build up the hip muscles, I guess.
I know, and like I'm a cyclist, and so it's something new. I'm also getting to. I'm a relatively new driver, believe it or not. I've only been driving my car for about 10 years.
Oh, okay.
There's a long story about my highs and things like that, and you can feel safe on the roads, everybody, but now I can drive, and so a lot of that is new for me, and I didn't understand cruise control for a long time, so it's now my best friend when my hips are going and that sort of stuff. But
enjoy cruise control.
Back to the idea of that time in the car for parenting, I'd find that is to me is my most high value of time, and I've gone so far as to be proactive about that and to say, I know the kids are getting in the car. Yeah. I think about open-ended questions and things like that. I'm listening to a podcast recently on interventions, and I don't mean big I interventions like let's have an intervention. It's basically the way you kind of cross paths with anybody in your life, and if you want to affect behavior change in any way, shape, or form, here are 4 kind of strategies that you can use. And I use that, and I draw on these things. I don't explain it to them like that. That would lose them immediately. That's end of engagement. Yeah, for sure, for sure. To me, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. I agree with the driving. I do now. To be honest, I've driven since I could, since I was a teenager, but I've always disliked driving, which is why I live in the city right by a train station or a bus. There's a bus stop right by me too, and everything is walking distance. I just enjoy walking and not even being on the train. I'd rather be walking than on any kind of vehicle. But because my kids are now in a lot of activities, I find myself in the car. And yeah, that time in the car, there are times where I'm like, okay, mommy just needs quiet time. And it's music only time. And then there are times where, it just even letting them ramble is great because just things come out and it's amazing.
The things come out, it kind of dovetails a little bit with what we're going to talk about today, which is this idea of literacy.
Yeah, early literacy.
The opportunity to hear your kids read out loud, the opportunity to hear your kids, talk about and that sort of stuff. So before we dive in, let's kind of talk about the who's, what's, where. The funny thing about literacy is like if you do any research on literacy, the first thing that you can do, I scan news. Right? Panic across. Here are some of the crazy stats. 25% of Canadians don't own a book. 30% of those in grade 3 lack basic literacy skills. 1 in 4 students in post-secondary education lacks basic literacy and numeracy. So, this is a great thing. I find that as parents, we're fishing the barrel sometimes because they're just shooting at us with enough stuff to kind of make us afraid consistently. And the thing is, you got to contextualize these numbers. Where they're coming from? What do they mean? But I think more importantly is that they point to the direction of what does literacy actually mean? Because there was a time where literacy was, what you read and what you say and how you write.
Yeah.
And more, I have older kids, and literacy means something very, very different in my household now.
Okay.
Certainly there was the time and the effort that we put against reading, and we still do. Like my 8-year-old, huge Dog Man reader, right? Which is Dave Pikey, the guy who created Captain Underpants, as these graphic novels.
I'm not familiar with that.
These Dog Man, and what's really clever about him, he's publishing them twice a year now. Because they're publishing twice a year, it's a good way to introduce kids to longer form narrative before they actually get into full-on paragraph books and things like that. So we're making that shift now, but I get the opportunity to hear all about the crazy characters and that sort of stuff. But as you get kind of further down the line, literacy can be about kind of developing that idea of context. And with the 8-year-old, I remember we were out for a walk the other day with the dog, and of course there are election signs all over the place. And we talked about this last week about the idea of understanding what the different teams, what the different parties are. But I said, hey, do you see that sign over there? And I said, yeah. I said, what team is that? And so I said, and do you know what the name of the team is? And she read the word conservative off the bottom of the sign. And then we took the next step. And the next step is, what does that mean? Who are these people? What do they stand for? And things like that. And that really kind of instigates that conversation. So I know it's transcending the idea of traditional reading, but that's the goal. Is the next one is how you kind of form that for critical thinking and have them to be able to not just accept the words, but understand what the words are. And I always make that argument, right? Like that our kids today are much better analysts than we were as kids because it was very rote learning once upon a time.
Do you really think so?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the time that we when I was a kid, the key drivers were reading, writing through things like spelling tests, handwriting, and things like that. What you're seeing now is it's a lot of project-based work, and because of that project-based work, what it is it's not saying, hey everybody, let's teach you critical thinking. It is the practice of critical thinking, and through that you can back end things like handwriting or printing and things like that. I absolutely believe that an 8-year-old today can outthink an 8-year-old from 1975, hands down. I
come at it with a different perspective. So I'm a writer and I work with younger writers at times. And so I have to read their product. And there are often times where I'm sitting scratching my head and asking myself, how did you not make that connection? Or how did you not read that in the research? Or did you not understand that? And so there's a lot of times there's that context, that critical thinking that they're not able to dig deeper in. And I've heard this from I have some friends who are teachers in high school specifically, and how they had said it might be because of social media and just the quick, it's not just the spelling that's the issue,
right,
but it's not really getting deep enough.
Yeah, it's like a superficial approach to analysis.
Yeah, and so everything is very high level rather than being able to dig in deep and make those connections. And so that's where I see. And so that whole critical thinking, the context of it. A couple of weeks ago, the name is blanking on me, where she was talking about just sharing those stories, talking stories out.
Right.
Who was it? Oh, now I can't remember.
This is our friend from Guelph?
Yes.
Whose name we can't remember.
Cannot remember, sorry.
But she was great.
She was wonderful. But she did say that helping, starting those stories. So one, the parent starts the story and gets the kid to continue the story. That helps with making those connections and providing that context.
That's something in some of the research I've been doing. One of the big kind of approaches in marketing communications and PR right now is the idea of co-creation. And the more and more I'm reading about this is if you want kids to engage with anything, it's about this idea of co-creation. One of the lines I heard is if you want, the classic one is if you want to figure out if a child has understood something that you're teaching to them, and this literacy really does play in, is you get them to teach it to you. Yeah. The better one that I heard was this line right here, which is, how would you explain this to your younger brother? Love that concept, because now you can actually test that idea of not only competency and understanding, but the ability to dig down. A big question we ask a lot in my house is the 5 whys, right? Keep digging down until we understand, and that's how that comes. But that line of how would you explain this to your younger brother or younger sister, really, really valuable, I think, in terms of how we get that across.
Yeah, for sure. And so I have younger kids, so literacy for us, especially now that we've kind of just graduated. So I have a 9-year-old who I would say she's a bit more advanced in reading, but the 8-year-old is still very much in the early stages. And so we'll be talking to our guest expert, who is her name is Nicole de Nobriga. And so she's going to come to us right after our break, and she will talk a little bit more about early literacy and how we can encourage kids to not only love books, but reading and all of that good stuff.
In the meantime, we want to hear your stories around literacy, because everybody does. I find this to be a very emotional issue for parents a lot of times, so we want to hear yours. You can give us a call at 416-640-0200 or join us on social media at Parents Canada. We're going to be right back in just a minute with Parents Canada Radio on News Talk Saga 960. Welcome back to Parents Canada Talk Radio. I am Jason Thompson. I am here with
Lisa Durante.
And we are talking literacy, the importance of reading, the importance of writing, the importance of contextualizing. You know, these are skills that, you know, are indelible. They are things that need to be part of the life. But the thing, again, I almost like to have a warning here, which is, along with everything that you see as a parent, there's lots of stuff out there that's going to scare you. We're here not to scare you. We're here to give you the skill sets that you can do, that you can feel confident in raising people who love to read. You know, I have kids who, I have one who's a huge fiction fan, and I have two who are huge nonfiction fans. Because Dad, I read almost no fiction, like almost none.
I love fiction.
But I read, 40 odd business books, documentary type books, biographies, things like that here. I love that stuff. I subscribe to something called Blinkist. Have you ever heard of this?
I have heard of it.
Yeah, so it's like it summarizes business books and things like that down to a handful of pages, and then it can help you understand whether or not you want to actually invest the time in reading it. I love the fact that you can kind of get key themes across that.
Yeah.
Now, we're joined today by somebody who is also a big reader. I love that she comes from the world where we come from, which is she spent the time in marketing communications and advertising. Her name is Nicole de Nobriga. And, she's got two, I love the way her bio puts it, two quirky preschoolers. I want to hear what that's all about. And, she spent a lot of time, launching ad campaigns, and she decided that she wanted to go after the biggest and most important client that she had. Herself. And so she's a lover of books. She's a lover of coffee. There's another great thing that we can spend a lot of time talking about, and things around her family. And here's the best part. She has a debut book series coming out this year called Tate's Tales. She is also a passionate book blogger, an advocate for early literacy, and she's here on our show today. Nicole, welcome to the show.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk all things books as a book lover.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited.
Did you go, a couple of weeks ago, there was the Eden Mills Writers Festival. You ever been to that?
I have not, but I have to tell you, now that I am embarking on this self-publishing journey, I'm starting to get well acquainted with a lot of these story time festivals and book festivals. There's so much great stuff out there.
There definitely is. And I have to say that I am a book lover. I think most times I like books better than I like people.
What are you reading right now? What are you reading?
Oh, I'm reading The Huntress. I'm actually reading 3 different books.
Of course you are.
But The Huntress is so good. And it is fiction, and I love it.
I'm reading The Art of Gathering, which is a story about how we meet and how we build community.
Cool.
That's interesting. I was listening a little bit about when you guys were talking about fiction and nonfiction, and I'm a sucker for biographies. I just think it's that relatability factor when you're reading somebody else's story. Again, just relating to, okay, I'm not alone in this. So I'm a really big biography fan.
What are you reading right now?
Oh my goodness. With a 4 and a 2-year-old, I'm lucky if I can, right now my world is picture books. Let's put it that way. So I put down my biographies until I get myself on a vacation.
Yeah.
But I'm in the picture book world. There's so much great stuff out there. I tend to recommend books on my weekly blog to kind of get parents and kids alike excited about reading. And it's sort of in an unconventional way. There's so many great books out there that you may not have heard of or have not been exposed to. So that's kind of my world right now, is the picture book world.
The picture book world, yeah. And I'm sure that you even have several of those memorized. I think I could still recite.
The Birthday Monsters is my favorite picture book of all time.
Actually, that was a favorite of ours too. I loved it. So, we were talking about literacy, and really literacy it can start at any time. I don't want to scare parents. It can start at any time, but really those early years, be they infants or toddlers, is a great time. And so what would you say are the benefits around that early literacy?
Exactly. I always say the earlier the better. Even when they're in the womb, there's, that idea of singing lullabies to them, exposing them to music. It's really no different than story time.
That's right. Yeah.
Starting that language association and hearing your voice, the earlier the better, in my opinion. There's so many benefits. The vocabulary building, the cognitive development by exercising that brain of theirs. And also just the fact that, forget the vocabulary and all the technical skills that come along with reading, but their imaginations. When you open up a book and you expose them to those stories, their imaginations go wild, and it really helps form those social awareness skills, emotion building in terms of the different characters in the books and how they're dealing with problem solving and all sorts of things. And actually, I read a stat recently that said if you read 5 books a day before kindergarten, your little one will hear about 1.4 million words.
Oh, my.
So that just goes to show, how much benefit there is to exposing.
That's actually there's an interesting stat that goes commiserate with that, which is it says the difference between families that have children who struggle in school and the difference that don't struggle when it comes to literacy and things like that are the parents who in the first year talk to their kids more. So whether they're reading or they're, whatever it is the number of words that are used in the household becomes a really, really valuable
That's
thing.
interesting.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I see that firsthand with my kids. My 4-year-old, he'll come out with phrases and expressions, and I think to myself, oh man, even when I think he's not listening to me.
He totally is,
I kind of love when they do that.
Yeah.
They're like little adults.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's so important, but how can we really develop a love of books and reading in our little ones?
Well, again, I think that when it comes to exposing books, it's not necessarily a linear approach where it's a chore or a task. I think it's a bit of a way of life. So I know growing up for me, there were always books around the house, and I don't remember having a very strict sense of, okay, we have to read this amount of books, or now it's story time. It just felt like it was part of our everyday life. I saw my parents reading books. We had bookshelves. We were taken to the library. So I think that's a good start, just to kind of
last
have
one
that
right there,
exposure.
Really want to underscore that one, that library one. I think sometimes we forget about what an incredible center that these libraries are, and how children, it's like, it's probably the same way that they look at a toy store, right? They walk in and it's this infinite place of possibility.
Exactly. And even if you don't necessarily have a mini library within your own home, you can even create that sense of imagination with them in their bedroom. Like, do they want a little corner with a bunch of pillows? Maybe they set up their stuffed animals. It's a little reading corner. Maybe they have a tent they really love putting up. Maybe that's their little reading corner where they pretend to read. So at a little age, they may not have those reading skills just yet, but just exposing them to the environment, I think, is a good start.
Yeah, well, just what you were just saying, creating that environment. So it almost becomes this ritual that they can go to their reading corner and pull out a book and just even look at the pictures if it's that at the beginning.
And that's part of the thing, isn't it, Lisa, is that idea of just getting getting little
kids.
people. Kids, they're people too. Getting them to kind of get into that habit of seeing story and things like that as a positive thing. But of course, you also do get, you can get into that kind of chore sensibility. Again, I have one of my kids who, tried to encourage a really strong fiction reading approach, and she really never took to it. So, I mean, what kind of advice can you give to parents around, if they're not into stories, if they're not into reading, what is it that you can do to kind of foster or ignite that ability to absorb that and get to that level of literacy you're trying to create?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that's probably one of the number one questions that parents have. I see that with my kids. My oldest devours books, has always just loved to digest information, whereas the other one's more sensory driven. He wants cause and effect. So I think there's a lot of ways to get your kids excited, even if they're not a fan of books. And it's about thinking about it in an unconventional way. So let's say your child is really into videos or watching movies. Well, a lot of great shows or movies have books associated with them, whether it's The Jungle Book or Paw Patrol or what their choice is. You can go to the library and say, hey, why don't we pick up a book that is sort of topical to something they're watching or they're interested in? So that's kind of a nice little segue. You've got a lot of interactive books. If, your child really isn't into the sitting and reading, you can get books with stickers and textures or novelty items associated with them. So again, it's thinking about reading in an unconventional way so they don't feel like they're sitting down and actually reading a book.
I read a couple of articles about, we're hearing in one of the big challenges within the education system is, kids are fidgety and things like that, and you need to kind of let them express some of that energy out before recess, and that ability to understand that, have that knowledge, and then give them that opportunity to see reading, not in that, you look at, parents who are probably in my age grade, they only see reading in kind of one context. It's, okay, you got to do 30 minutes of reading a day, so let's sit down and have our 30 minutes of reading.
Yeah, then it becomes more punishment than enjoyable.
One of the things I use...
It's almost like introducing that story time on their terms, where they're not even realizing they're being exposed to those language skills. So, for example, I know for me, I drink my coffee from McDonald's. So even those golden arches with the M, there's an association there, right? It's like there's the M for McDonald's, or when we go to the grocery store, the different aisles and the fruit section and the produce section. There are so many ways to sort of introduce that, so they're recognizing signs and letters at the mall, or even street signs. I know my boys are really into construction and trucks and street signs, and even just the stop sign with the big STOP. And it's, again, thinking about ways to introduce that language, get them to practice it without them realizing that this isn't, a chore that they have to sit down and devour an entire book. Because let's face it, everybody learns in different ways.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's a big thing, that idea of learning and kind of hitting them on all senses. One of the other places that I spend a lot of time playing is, we live in a social media universe. My kids are using, they're on YouTube and things like that. And so what I'm teaching is, how to use critical thinking and critical search skills, like, using Google effectively to find things that they're looking for. So if I've got one, and I do, who's really into squishies, right? I teach her how to use Google to not just search up squishy, but to actually look for more interesting things, so she can actually use that language in a more practical way.
Yeah, that is
interesting. And you never know how a story or a concept or a book can lead to something else. So in that squishy example, it can lead to all these other things that she's discovering.
She found out what Alibaba Express was.
Sorry?
She found out what Alibaba Express was, and suddenly she wanted me to order a whole bunch of squishies. It's a double-edged sword.
Well, just what you guys are saying about, you really can learn, and there's so much more to learn. And one of those things is, you can use books to really talk about big milestones and things like that. I would love to chat more with you if you would stay with us through the commercial, and maybe we can talk about how books can be used for milestones. So will you be able to stick around, Nicole?
I would love to.
Okay, great. So you are listening to Parents Canada Talk Radio on News Talk Saga 960. Please join the conversation. We'll be taking your questions in the next segment. So at 416-640-0200, or hit us up on social media at Parents Canada. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back. You're listening to Parents Canada Talk Radio on News Talk Saga 960. You're here with Lisa Durante and my co-host
Jason. I'm Jason.
Yeah, and on the phone is Nicole de Nobriga, who is talking to us about early literacy. And one of the questions that I wanted to touch upon, Nicole, was about using books to open up conversations about big milestones, or even about other experiences. One of the things that I use books to do is really to start a conversation with my kids. We've read many books over the years about, some of them, very sensitive topics, and just so that they are exposed to someone else's experience. And I shared something over the phone with you yesterday when we were talking, Nicole, was that one of the books my kids pulled off the library shelf was about a family whose dad goes to jail. And I obviously didn't realize it until we were reading the book. And so that story just opened up. It felt like weeks of conversation because my child just couldn't understand it. So how do you talk about that, how books can be used for milestones? Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. I think it is a great way to open up conversations with your kids, because especially with the little ones, it might be hard for them to articulate their feelings and kind of get their point across. They may not even recognize that what they're feeling, if they're having butterflies in their stomach, what does that really mean? So as an example, my 4-year-old just started school in September, and I knew he was a little nervous about it, but he didn't necessarily know how to talk about it. So we focused for a few weeks in the summer on books that helped open those conversations. So we talked about, what to expect at school, the routine part of it, even just diversity within the classrooms. It's so important to introduce books to kids that show all different types of children, whether they have different cultural backgrounds or faiths. so that they realize that their world is just a little world in a bigger world. And sometimes a book is a great way to introduce that to them and expose them to those questions and those conversations. So when it came to back to school, I really leaned a lot on books that I thought would help get those conversations going. And they did. He asked me a lot of questions. He was able to tell me how he was feeling, and we worked through that. Yeah. And there's so many other great opportunities now with Thanksgiving coming up. I really want to focus on books where he understands, okay, Thanksgiving has a lot to do with pumpkins and apple pie and us eating a lot and going to the farm. But what does it really mean about giving thanks? What should we appreciate in life? And what does that all mean? So that's kind of next on my list. And that's something that I'm hoping through the books that we choose, it'll start to get the wheels turning in his head. So I think books are a great way to get those conversations going. And sometimes they have those questions, but they don't want to approach you about it. And a book can be a great way to start that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so we have some questions. Again, if you're listening and you do have a question for Nicole, you can shoot us an email. We're at 416-640-0200, or you can hit us up on social media at Parents Canada. But we did receive a few questions already. Jason, you want to share?
It's funny. You just showed me this one. This one actually resounded really nicely, which is, how do you support and encourage a child with dyslexia who is not a fan of reading?
Well, I mean, dyslexia isn't necessarily my area of expertise, but I can say that, whether it's dyslexia or just any type of learning challenge or just kids in general who aren't a fan of reading, I think it goes back to our conversation about making it less of a chore and more of an experience for them. So if they're already finding it difficult to read, that's going to put that much more pressure on them. So from a parenting standpoint, I think it's, finding those books that cover topics they're interested in. Perhaps it's an interactive book that engages beyond just the words. The word associations we talked about outside of the house. So, if you're taking a road trip, is it sort of giving he or she a list of the directions? If they're age appropriate, and they can start recognizing those words. Okay, can you tell mommy or daddy, when I turn left on such and such street? Maybe it's a grocery list. So again, those unconventional ways so that you're exposing and practicing those language skills without putting that pressure on them if they're already finding the difficulty.
I had someone come up to me once when I lecture on corporate recognition. And we talk about, writing thank you notes and writing nominations and things like that. And a guy came up to me at the end of a session I gave. He says, I have a learning disability. And I said to him, that's great. And I went, well, it's not great that you have learning disability. What's great is that there's actually a solution for you. And what I encouraged them to do is a couple of things. One was to use the headlines to understand, to speak in kind of like those short form, high impact. And I'm a writer, so we talked about kind of verb selection and things like that. And the second is verbal, right? I know we're talking about literacy, but the great thing here is to be able to kind of tell stories and share stories verbally in addition to. So I find that you can create a love of storytelling, verbal storytelling, as a way to get them into the books.
Absolutely. And even if, those choose your own adventure books, or even if you don't finish the books that you're reading, and you say, you know what, why don't we stop right here? What do you guys think is going to happen next? And just kind of get them involved in the story. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. This next question comes, and I think it kind of follows on some of what you were saying, and it was about how can they have a young child, a young baby, and so they just wanted, what are some of the routines to start incorporating reading so that it just becomes a natural part of their day? And I don't know how young the baby, but she did say baby. So what do you think are some routines?
So I know for what works well for us in our house, well, first of all, sleep was very important. Very early on when I became a parent, I realized,
we got a show for you.
Yeah, I said, wow, sleep is a lot more important than I realized. So it actually naturally wove its way into our bedtime and nap time routine with our kids, where it signaled, okay, this is wind down time. So for us in our house, we always incorporate story time at bedtime. And again, my 2-year-old is very different than my 4-year-old. And, that time for him could be somersaults on the bed and maybe listening to a page, maybe not listening. But the idea is we've got books on the bed and we're engaging. So for us, we wove it into our bedtime routine as well as nap time. But there are so many ways. It's kind of putting it on the kids' terms again, where if you notice there's a certain time of day where they like to wind down, or they're focused on something, then it's maybe introducing that story time and that book time within that environment. But bedtime's a really easy one to incorporate because it's just kind of that time with them. And then for them, it's sort of drags on them having to go to bed. It's like one more story, right?
Yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've been doing reading before bed. It has been a big one. I think it's because it's a ritual that I have practiced since I was a little girl, and it always lulled me to sleep. It always allowed me to just kind of relax and then fall asleep. Otherwise, I'd kind of be with my own thoughts. And so it's been part of our bedtime routine, and my oldest is going to be 10 later this year, and we still read together. Now after I finish reading to both of them, because they share a bedroom, I then leave her with the light on and she will read a couple pages. But usually by that time, you see her little bedroom eyes are starting and she's starting to close her eyes. So I'm like, it's going to be a page and she's going to be out.
When you say the reading together, do you get her to read out loud still?
I actually read out loud to them.
Right.
Right now we're in the middle of, I think we're on book 5 of Harry Potter. So sometimes it's them reading. So if the time is too short to read, a good chapter of Harry Potter, then they'll read. Each of them will take a turn reading, but a lot of times I still read.
Right.
Yeah.
I read something not so long ago that said even reading out loud to your kids and having them read out loud to you, even when they're 11, 12, is actually still a very, very positive experience and can actually foster that love of reading, foster that ability towards literacy.
And I always find, one of the benefits, we were talking at the top of the show about all the pressure that we put on ourselves and all that. And it's, for me, the reading wasn't simply, I'm going to try to teach them that, what was that stat you gave, the 1,000,000+ words?
Yeah, the 1.4.
Yeah, that wasn't my intention. But I always, especially when they were very young, reading a book together was a bonding time. Like, it was time for us to just cuddle and be close and then, and be silly, because some of those books like Birthday Monsters could be silly and you could make noises and it was just fun.
No, you must read them very formally.
Yeah, no, those Sandra Boynton books are, they're at the top of the list for me.
We have the Barnyard Dance.
Oh,
yes, that's
just all of them.
in our house.
All of them. We have one last question, and it's about early readers. And so she said an early reader, so I think that's anywhere from 5 to 7. So how can we build confidence in my early reader? He gets so frustrated trying to read and he gives up, and that's kind of the end of the story. So any encouragement there on building confidence?
I think that there is that pressure element, especially if you're reading out loud, depending on the environment, where they feel like, why do I keep getting stuck on this word? So I can completely relate to that. We're not at that stage just yet with my 4-year-old, but I would just say a lot of it is that environment as well. So, for example, if we take the bedtime routine and it's the bonding time, it's the no judgment zone, it's let's have a conversation, and less about, okay, let's hit every letter. It's going to come. It's all about practice. It's like anything in life, right? If you keep at it and you keep practicing, you're going to keep getting better. So encouragement and positive reinforcement rather than it being sort of a stressful situation for them, I think is huge. So I pick up on cues with my kids, and if I feel like, you know what, I see the tick down of, okay, there's gonna be something happening soon, I kind of take that cue and I move on. So I would say, take them at their pace and in the environment where they feel comfortable, and with practice and exposure, you're going to get there. Yeah.
If I could add one more, because my youngest is 8, so she's just coming out. She's now, I would call her a confident reader, but it was really, really tough the first, year or so. And we started off with little books, like books so we got them through her teacher, that they were very, very easy. They would be maybe 3 pages long. But for her to say that, I finished a book, she just felt so accomplished because she had never been able to do it because all the other books were so big and long. So it was just building. And then slowly the books got a bit longer and a bit longer. And then we kept a tally chart, because I was like, look how many books you read. And I would say, Mommy only read 3 books this year. And she could say she read 15 books. And
that's a great point, too. It's, as parents, we do want to hit all these milestones, of course, but there's nothing wrong with picking a book that doesn't necessarily fit in the box of the age or the level that they necessarily should be at. It's, again, just about fostering and encouraging that love of reading so that eventually over time they do build those confidence skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry,
go ahead. No, I was just going to say that I could keep talking to Nicole all day.
But you mentioned this idea of finishing a book. Nicole, you've just finished a book or two, but not on the reading side, on the writing side. So, we're going to wrap up here, but we'd love to hear about what you're up to and where we can find out more.
For sure. So, I've taken on a self-publishing journey, which is very new to me. I've always had a passion for writing. When I was in marketing and advertising, I dabbled into, more of the commercial side of things. But with a 4 and 2-year-old, these books write themselves, honestly. The questions they ask, the way they see the world, it flows out of me. And within a month or so, I had a couple stories with a title character, and it just felt so natural.
Nice.
So I'm going to debut my first book, hopefully by the end of this year, if not early 2020, and it's a birthday book. So it's about a little boy who's turning 4, and he thinks that he's one step closer to being an adult. And so it's in his eyes what he thinks that means and what that looks like for him. So the idea of this title character is about curiosity, imagination, and really how they view the world, which is always so unapologetic and raw and quirky and funny. So that's kind of where I'm going with it.
And where can we find more about you? Where can we connect with you?
I'm on Instagram. I'm at Nicole_DE_Nobriga, Nobriga. And so you can follow me there for all my writing process, any of my book recommendations. And then I have a website, which is www.NicoleDeNobriga.com. And basically, again, I promote early literacy. I give lots of tips. I have some interviews on there, book recommendations, and anything new about my book and when it's coming out.
Nicole, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Tate's Tales comes out maybe later this year, maybe early 2020, but definitely keep an eye open for that.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.
Thanks.
And to everyone else, hang around. We're going to wrap up in just a couple of minutes. But again, if you got more thoughts on this or any of the other topics that we've covered, you can find us on social media. We're on all the good ones at Parents Canada. Meanwhile, you're listening to Parents Canada Talk Radio on News Talk, Saga 960. Here we are wrapping up at Parents Canada Talk Radio. We are talking literacy. Just had another fascinating conversation with a budding author and great parent. Mm-hmm. Gave us lots of tips. What did you learn today?
A lot of it was just reinforcing that stat that you gave, the 1 million+ words, is quite interesting and the impact that it has. But it's just really all about the routines and making it part of your day. Bringing reading into any part of your day is just great. And, one of the things Nicole said, you could be in the car and read a street sign or one of the advertisers and get kids to not only read, but even start to be get used to words and the sounds of words and things like that. Yeah. How about you?
Reading is fun. I mean, that's the key thing that I think gets lost so much in all of the anxiety around these numbers and, that sort of thing. I try to avoid almost any stat that I read in a newspaper these days because really the idea is it's just giving me another reason to be anxious about something. In truth is reading is fun and truly the number one parenting skill, if I was ever to give a new parent an idea, it's modeling. Modeling. Have books around the house. Read on your own. Make it part of what you do every single day. My kids have my kids all have iPads. They all have books, the Apple application on the right. We buy books on it. We use the highlighter. I'm a big tech dad, but I use technology in a way that doesn't separate them from reading and kind of amalgamating media. My favorite thing I've ever seen, because one of the things that I find is in all of this fear-based culture, is that we end up hating words. And what I mean by that is how many times have you corrected somebody from a grammar or spelling perspective? There is a great video from Stephen, the British comedian Stephen Fry, which talks about how we can continue to embrace the beauty of language. And it's one of these kinetic videos, so you actually get to see the language moving on the screen. Okay. Search up Stephen Fry kinetic type video. I'll tell you, it will re-inspire your love of language and of reading and get you to actually encourage kids to do it as well. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful video.
Yeah, and in addition to that one, you can head over to parentscanada.com, and there are several articles that have already been written about how to get your preschooler really to build those literacy skills. I know that there's a lot of pressure that parents feel, especially when you're going into kindergarten, that your kid is supposed to know all these things. It's okay. It'll be fine, but there are ways that you can start to build those.
Can I just tag on to that real quick? Yeah. That idea of my kid is ahead or behind, unless it's a serious chronic issue and you can identify those easily, your kid is only ahead or behind a curriculum. They'll get there as long as you build the environment. And if you identify that there are larger skills that need it, you can see those. Don't panic.
Yeah. But go on over to parentscanada.com and find those tips. And there's also tips to help reprogram your reluctant reader. I thought that one was interesting as well.
Yeah, and that's the title of the article. So if you actually look that up, tips to help reprogram your reluctant. There's a lot of alliteration in there. I like that. And then, of course, five ways to promote literacy and learning through music, which I think is a great idea about using music, about using lyrics and things like that to get kids to actually embrace the idea. It was a great article.
Yeah. They were both good. And I think there were a few others, but I can't remember the titles.
I got one more. Preschool years, how to teach pre-literacy skills at home. That's one more you can find.
Okay. Yeah, so that's another show, Jason. Cannot believe it. So thank you for listening to Parents Canada Talk Radio. You're listening on Saga News Talk Saga 960, and we'll be back next week.